Hey guys, what's going on? It's Gunnar here. Welcome back to the channel. Now, as we're shifting into habitat season, we're past the new year. Most of the deer hunting for this year is done, and we're starting to focus on what needs to get done on the properties, what type of changes are we going to be making, planning, preparing, and actually doing the physical work that we need to get done for next year to have more success, maybe bigger deer, maybe a better opportunity at those big deer. But I want to talk quickly today about switchgrass. Now, some of you guys that have been following the channel for a little while know that I've got multiple different reasons and situations that I'll use switchgrass. And I love switchgrass strictly because it's got multiple different scenarios where I can use it effectively and it does an excellent job. Now, the first being is screening my food plots, right? As you guys can maybe see here, I've got a strip of switch running roughly 80 yards long here, and that's screening this 1/3 of an acre food plot. And that is extremely important when you're trying to promote daytime movement and daytime use. When we're dealing with high pressure whitetails in a state like Wisconsin or anywhere across the Midwest, whenever you have big wide open areas, deer are just naturally going to be a little bit more edgy. They're not necessarily going to want to be using that a long time before it gets to that gray light time frame, right before dark there. So if you want to exponentially improve the daytime consistency and use of your food plots, screening them with a native grass like switchgrass, and the reason that I pick switchgrass here is not because it's the only option, right? There's multiple different options. You have a short-term option when it comes to screening as well, which is Egyptian wheat, and I've used it and it works, it's effective, but it's also causing me to have to do more work year in and year out, and it's also burning out my soil because, let's face it, Egyptian wheat is a nitrogen pig, and if you don't want to be consistently buying a lot of fertilizer and pounding that ground that you're planting it in, I would recommend going towards more of a long-term plan, which would then be a native grass like switchgrass here. Now, this is a situation where I've got a little bit of a hog back roll here on this hillside, and I've got this inside corner food plot. Like I said, it's roughly 1/3 of an acre, but the reasoning that I put this here is I already have this existing old fence line. Now, it was fairly brushy. There's some goldenrod in here, but a lot of the trees were getting to that point where they're almost over mature, where they're not getting a lot of brush underneath them, right? The leaves are starting to shade them out, and one of those things where if you start dropping some of these trees on this fence line, it's going to take a while for those trees to grow back. So that's not something that I wanted to do. So I wanted to screen deer height, but not necessarily remove my canopy trees either. So that was the whole situation. I came in here, I tilled this up, I frost seeded my switchgrass in here, and all I did was mow manage it. This is 3-year-old switch. It really took off this year. It's been okay the last couple of years, but I've been fighting some weeds. But that's what you're going to be dealing with when you're planting switchgrass. It's not going to take off those first 2 years like you would expect. Not like an Egyptian wheat for sure. Egyptian wheat is going to get 8 to 12 feet tall that first year, but you're going to have to continually plant it. With switchgrass, you plant it once, you manage it, and once you get that stand established, you can burn it every once in a while, but it's pretty much taking care of itself after that. I like to burn that thatch off every 3-4 years, something like that, just to clean up that ground level a little bit and promote a little bit more regeneration with some of those seeds. But for the most part, this is a headache that's off my mind. I plant it once and I'm good to go. So that's the first situation that I love planting switchgrass, is for screening. Now, this isn't just screening this food plot. This is also screening my entrance to a blind that sits over standing beans here. So I'm effectively screening this food plot, whereas if there's a deer in here, when I come into that standing bean blind, they're not going to see me. Like I said, it really took off this year. It was 7-ish, 8 feet tall in its prime. Now, I've driven through here with the ATV a couple times, so I've matted this over down here. But as I'll show you, we've had multiple snows that have come and melted off and come and melted off throughout the year here in southwest Wisconsin, but this switchgrass is still standing beautifully. I'm 5'9", and it's well over my head. It's nice and thick. I've got some dogwood shrubs planted here and there within it. But screening food plots is one of the situations that I really, really enjoy using this. Now, another situation that I'll use switchgrass is on inside corners. Now, I talked about this being an inside corner plot, and I'm screening that movement off here to promote that daytime activity. Another situation that I've got roughly 400 yards back behind me is I've got a big, nice inside corner that these deer naturally want to cross. But I'm just promoting a little bit more crossing through there when they're bouncing over top of that knob. I'm promoting that by planting the whole thing with switchgrass. Now that was our first really effective stand of switchgrass that we planted roughly 10 years ago, and I would argue that versus year 4 or 5, it's much better today. Just because we've burned it a couple times, we've eliminated some of that weed competition within it, but that's one of the areas that it used to be a food plot, but it wasn't producing the way I was expecting. So I just went ahead and added more cover, and what that's doing is that creates that depth that we're searching for. When we're trying to create depth, we're trying to stack as many deer as possible within a reasonable amount of distance from our food sources. So when I put that good solid base of cover right up next to that bean field on that inside corner, I'm stacking does and fawns just behind that because it is right next to the food source. They're stacked just behind that. And then once I get over the hill and over that knob, that's where my bucks have free roam to bed wherever they would like. So I'm creating that depth, whereas if I just had it in a food plot, I would set that depth 50 yards, 60 yards farther back. And that's not something that I want to do. I want those does as close to the food source as possible, so I do have room for the bucks behind them still on this property. So that's a really good situation that I've enjoyed using switchgrass. Now the last situation that I've used switchgrass and that I really like the way it fits into the piece of the puzzle is I'm trying to create an entire new food plot, an entire new stand location, and basically an entire new travel corridor on the other side of the farm. And what I've done is I've taken about a 1/3 of an acre rectangle that used to be an old pasture ground, wasn't valuable for wildlife whatsoever, just a bunch of cool season grasses, not getting over maybe knee height. So I went ahead and I tilled that up, frost seeded switch again, and what I've got now is a beautiful 1/3 of an acre right up adjacent to the ag field, and then adjacent to that running down to the wood edge. Like I've talked about before, I've got a nice orchard edge is what we're calling it, with a bunch of different tree plantings. I've got dogwoods in there. I've got some chestnuts as my canopy timber. And basically what I'm trying to create is an entire new line of movement, basically. So I'm creating a nice blind location where that edge of my orchard edge meets that switchgrass, that transition of habitat, and I'm screening that from the big ag field. So it'll be secluded on all sides once those trees start to grow up and create that cover, that side cover that these deer are looking for. But it's also at the same time producing that daytime browse and the food value. So I've got the dogwoods, I've got the fruit trees on the inside of that switchgrass. So we've got food plot, switchgrass, ag field. So I'm creating a highly attractive travel corridor, brand new on the farm, and I'm using switchgrass to separate those deer from whatever deer in the food plot to whatever deer in the ag field, to avoid that social pressure, that herd pressure. If there's multiple deer in the ag fields, I'm trying to create separation between bunches of deer to make them feel safe and secure and comfortable using that food plot during daylight. So switchgrass is very valuable to anybody who's managing a property for wildlife. Now, I say wildlife, not deer, because switchgrass is valuable for many different wildlife species, whether that be rabbits, any sort of ground critter, turkeys, pheasants. It's really good turkey nesting habitat. I've had multiple different hatches that I found inside a lot of my switchgrass, not only because it's still standing in the winter months. After you do get that snowfall, it's protecting them. It's laying over itself. You're going to have some stalks that are bent over and folded over, kind of creating a canopy effect, and you're going to have some that are still standing. So it's a really good situation for turkeys in the springtime. When they're nesting, they're protected from the aerial predators, and at the same time, it's super dense and they can hide them really well from a lot of those ground predators as well. So switchgrass is a staple on our farm. We love to use it for multiple different situations that I've talked about here today. But as far as getting this switchgrass established, there's multiple different techniques that you can use to get it established fairly quickly. Now, like I said, you have to be patient when it comes to allowing this switchgrass to take off. Like I said, this is a year 3 stand. And it didn't really start getting good until this year, where it crested that 6-7 foot height. But having some patience and continually keeping those weeds at bay by raising that mower duck right up to the switchgrass height and clipping those weeds off to avoid that switch getting shaded out at a young age, you're going to have, after 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to have a really nice stand of switchgrass that's great habitat for not only deer, but all the other wildlife as well.